Hello and welcome to another VBScript video. In this video, we'll look at the array variable in VBScript. First of all, what is an array variable? Well, sometimes the situation is that we have a number of values that are very similar. For example, a bunch of customer names or a series of order numbers. So instead of declaring separate variables to store each one of those data, what we can do is we can create a single array variable and store the data values within that array variable. So array variables are useful for storing multiple values because multiple values can be stored in a single array variable. So here is an example of an array variable. We have an array variable called str customers. Whenever we declare array variables in VBScript, we have to give the number of items in that array variable. So here the number is 3. Now str customers 3 can store 4 name strings. That is because the index or the item numbers are starting from 0. So we have str customers 0, str customers 1, str customers 2 and str customers 3. And if each one of these array elements can store a separate name string or any other data. So for example, here we have str customer 0 is Abe, str customers 1 is Ben, and so on. So let us see how we can use array variable by looking at an example. So here we have a script and there are a couple of calls to sub procedures here. So the first call is to the sub procedure called fixed array. What is a fixed array? That we'll see in a minute. But this is the sub procedure. Now the first line of the sub procedure is dim str customers 3. This means that this is an array variable and it can contain 4 different data values or 4 different elements. So we can assign separate data to each one of the elements. So str0 is some name, str1 is some other name, similarly str2 is some other name, and str3 is some other name. So let us execute this script. One new thing that we can see is that here we have given the echo statement. Now it is possible to run VBScript in a couple of different ways. One is using the GUI mode that we have seen so far when we could show message boxes. Another is to have the VBScript executed as a command line script. So that is what we are going to see today. So the name of this script is array1. Now if you want to execute this VBScript on command line, that means all the output will come to the command line. The command for that is cscript and then you give the name of the script. So in our case it is array1.vbs, and this is going to call the fixed array sub procedure and it is going to show the data value that is in the 0th index, or that means the first data element within the str customers array. So it says str customer 0 is Abe, and this way we can print out the anything that we want using the command line VBScript host. Now as I said, we need to understand what is fixed array. Fixed array basically means the number of elements or items that can be stored in the array is fixed. So why it is fixed? Because in the dim statement where we declared the array, we specified that the maximum index of the array is 3. Since it is a 0 based index, so that means it can contain elements from number 0 to number 3, which is 0, 1, 2 and 3. So 4 elements. So this is a fixed array. Now let us look at the example of a dynamic array. Dynamic array is when we don't know the number of elements that we need to store in the array in advance. So let us see an example of that. So now the call is going to be the dynamic array sub procedure. So here the difference, you can see that we have not given the number of elements in the dim statement. So here we have an array. The name of the array variable is str customers new, and we have just declared it with the dim statement. Now before we put any data values within the array, we need to define how many elements are there to be in the array in the case of this dynamic array. So for that we have the redim statement. So redim str customers new, and we have given the upper index as 3. This means that str customers new can contain 4 elements. Now here we have assigned values to those 4 elements. Now there is a redim preserve statement in VB script. So what it does is we can change the number of elements within array by using the redim statement. So earlier, let us say that we just needed an array to contain 4 customer names, so we declared it as on line 16. But now we need the same array to contain 6 customer names, so we have given the redim statement, and with str customers new as 5. Now here also notice that there is a preserve word given over here, and preserve basically means that whatever data is already exists within the array, that should be preserved. And then because now we can add couple more elements, because we have redimensioned our array to 5 as the upper limit, so that means we can give element number 4 and 5 also, so we have given those also. And next we just are going to print it out. So we have declared a counter variable I. For I is equal to 0 to ubound. Ubound is a VB script built-in function. If we don't remember or don't want to remember how many elements are in the array, so we can use a ubound function, and that gives us the upper bound of the array. So that is going to be 5, because that is what we have declared on line 21. So here we have the for loop for I is equal to 0, because the array starts from 0 to upper bound of str customers new, and we are writing the echo statement. The element I is, and we can reference the element like str customers new, and we can give the index of I. So I is, as the for loop executes, I is going to change. First it is going to become 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. So let us execute this script now. So here you can see that earlier when we had on line 16 we had 4 elements. So we have A, Ben, Chris and Dustin, and then we redimensioned our array. We increased the number of elements in the array, and we could add couple more customer names after that. And this print is done by the for loop from statement 25 to 27. Now when you use the redim statement, if you already have data in the array, then you should use preserve, otherwise the data is going to be lost. So let us remove the preserve keyword here and see what is the effect of that, and let us execute the script again. So here we can see that the first 4 elements of the array have been lost. Why they have been lost? Because on line 21 we redimensioned the array, and at the time of redimensioning we did not specify to VB script that the data should be preserved. So VB script increased the number of elements of the array to 6, but the existing data was lost. So when there is already some data values within the array, then you should use the preserve keyword. So let us put preserve again, and this time it's going to work correctly. So that is about fixed array and dynamic array. So just in summary, a fixed array has a fixed number of elements, and dynamic array we can increase or decrease the number of elements in the array. Now in the last example we have stored strings in the array, but we can store any data type within the array. So let us see an example where numbers are stored in the array. So here we have an array, and the name of the array is numbers, and the upper bound of the array is 5. That means it can contain element from index 0 to index 5. That means it can store 6 different numbers in this single array variable. So first there is a call to fill numbers sub procedure, and here is the fill number sub procedure. So basically it puts some numbers 10, 2, 3, 8, 12 and 1, and then we have a call to average numbers. Now what average number does is it declares a couple of variables, int total and I, and then it puts an initial value of 0 in int total, because our purpose is to get an average of all these numbers. Then it runs a loop from I is equal to 0 to 5. Why 0 to 5? Because we want to add all the numbers within the array. So the indexes of the array start from 0 and end till 5. So that is why we run this for loop from 0 to 5. And we write int total is equal to int total plus numbers I. So what is going to happen? First time I will be 0. So numbers 0 is added to int total, then I becomes 1. So numbers 1 is added to int total, then I becomes 2. Numbers 2 is added to int total, and so on. Then what we do is we output a statement, the average is, and we divide int total, whatever is the sum, by 6, because there are 6 elements in the array, and we use the round VBScript built-in function to round it off to 2 decimal places. So let us execute this script. So C script, and the name of this script is array2.vbs. So here it says the average is 6. So let us verify it. So first of all, what we did is we added up all the numbers. So 10 and 2 and 3 and 8 and 12 and 1, and the total is 36 divided by 6 number of elements. So the average is 6. We can change some numbers here. So let us say instead of 12 we give 18, and we run the script again. So this time the average is 7. Let me put something a little odd. So here the average is more than 7, but it rounds it off to 2 decimal places because we have used a round function. So that is about manipulating an array containing numbers. So let us get rid of this and see how we can sort the arrays. Now sorting an array variable means that we place the items or elements in the array in some logical order. So if it is numbers, we can put them in ascending order or descending order. Same with strings, we can put the strings in alphabetical order or reverse alphabetical order. So sorting means each element in the array has to be in a logical order. So how we can do the sorting is, so overall we have to use a couple of loops. So here we have the for loop, and it is from line 19 to line 32. So the logic that has been used in this for loop is that since we have elements from index 0 to index 5, we are running a loop from 0 to 4. Why we are running it from 0 to 4? Because at every execution or every run of this loop, we want that the highest element should be at its proper position. So this is the loop, and within this loop we have another loop, and because the J loop is within the I loop, this J loop is called the nested loop. Nested loop means it lies totally within the outer loop. So J loop is the nested loop. So inside this loop, what we do is we run it from 0 to 4 minus I. Now what is going to happen is that we have the numbers, and every execution or every run of the I loop, which is the outer loop, we want the highest element to be in the proper position, and within that we check the entire length of the array, and the check that is made is that if numbers j, which is the element to the left, is greater than numbers j plus 1, what this means is that the element on left hand side is greater than the element on the right hand side. So here a perfect example is, if you notice number 0 and number 1, so 10 is first and 2 is next. So this is the wrong order because we want to sort in ascending order. That means increasing order. So first we should get 2 and then we should get 10. So if it is the other way, if numbers j, the element on the left, is greater, then what we have to do, we have to swap the two array elements. That means change the position of the two elements. And whenever we want to swap the value of two variables, we have to use a third variable, and that third variable is temp. So what we do is we write temp is equal to numbers j. That means the current value of numbers j will be placed in temp. So numbers j is 10, so temp will contain 10. Then we assign numbers j is equal to numbers j plus 1. That means the other variable we put in numbers j. And then what we do is we already had kept the initial value of numbers j in temp, so that we put in numbers j plus 1. So the effect of these three statements is that the values stored in numbers j and numbers j plus 1 are interchanged or swapped. So this is the inner loop, and this inner loop is going to run from 0 to 4 minus I. Why minus I has been written here? Because at the first execution of the loop, the highest element will already be in the last position. So next time we need not even consider that. So next time we have to consider one less element, and in the next time one less element, and so on. So once this loop is executed, so here we have a few statements, and here we have a variable str numbers. We just want to print out the current numbers in the array. So what we have is, for j is equal to 0 to 5, that means from the lower bound of the array to the upper bound, and we are just making a string by concatenating numbers j to the previous value and put that over here. So let us execute this and see how it works. So we need to save the script and run it again. So here we can see that when I was 0, the outer loop I, when the value of I is 0, at the end of execution of this loop, what was the highest element? The highest element was 19. And you can see in this entire list of elements that 19 has reached its correct position. 19 is the highest element and it has reached the index 5, that means the correct position. When I is 1, that means the second time we went through the array, the second highest element, which is 10, has reached its correct position. By the way, this algorithm is called the bubble sort algorithm, and bubble sort means that every execution of the outer loop, the highest element bubbles to the top to its correct position. So when I was 0, the highest element went to its correct position. When I was 1, the second highest element went to its correct position. And when I was 2, the third highest element went to its correct position. When I was 3, then the fourth highest element was in the correct position, and when I was 4, the fifth highest element was in the correct position. So at the end of the outer loop, we can see that the entire array is sorted. So the numbers were initially 10, 2, 3, 8, 19 and 1. So that means they were not sorted, and at the end of this sort sub procedure, they are not sorted. 1, 2, 3, 8, 10 and 19. They have been assigned in sorted in an ascending order because we wrote the if statement here that if the number on the left is greater than number on the right, then we need to swap. So let us say we just need the entire array to be sorted in descending order, that means decreasing order. So the only change that we need to make here is just put the less than sign. So now the condition becomes, if number on the left is less than number on the right, then swap, because we want the bigger numbers to be on the left side. So let us execute this script again, And now you can see when I was 0, it was the smallest number is 1 and 1 has reached its correct position. When I was 1, the second smallest number was 2 and that has reached its correct position. When I was 2, the third smallest number reached its correct position, and so on. And by the end, we have the entire array sorted in descending order. So earlier it was 10, 2, 3, 8, 19 and 1, but now it is in decreasing order: 19, 10, 8, 3, 2, 1. So this is how we can sort numbers in VBScript, and we can also sort strings in VBScript alphabetically, either in ascending order or descending order, by using similar logic. So that is about arrays, and in this video we saw what are arrays. Array variable is a variable that can store multiple values. It is useful when we have a series of related values. There is a fixed array. Fixed array means that we declare how many elements the array is going to contain, and sometimes we don't know how many elements the array is going to contain, so we can have a dynamic array, and then we can set the number of elements in that dynamic array by using the redim statement. If you already have data in the array and you're using the redim statement, make sure that you use the preserve keyword, otherwise the existing data is going to be lost. Then we saw how to work with numbers in an array. So we can assign some numbers to the array, we can add them up, get the average. Then we saw the sorting, and in sorting we have the outer loop. Outer loop runs from 0 to upper bound of the array -1, and within this we check for the adjacent elements of the array, and if they are not in order, we swap them to put in order. So that is all in this video. So I hope you got a good idea of VBScript arrays. So thank you and see you in the next video.